This is the story of Jimmy Governor, an Aboriginal man who, with his brother Joe and others, killed 9 people, most of them women and children. This is not an attempt to make a hero of him, but an attempt to understand what drives a person to commit such crimes that set the entire country into a frenzy of fear. Just as we need to understand what makes the students at Columbine High School and other schools and university in the USA murder their schoolmates, when we realise somebody wants to throw bombs at us, it is probably a good idea to ask them why they hate us. Jimmy Governor was good at everything he attempted. In today's terms, he might be called an alpha male. Jimmy was known as a hard and competent worker. He worked with his father in a carting business, as a police tracker at Cassler's, and in his own business as a fencer and timber cutting contractor. That is, a small businessman. But Jimmy was never accepted by the white community. He was constantly bullied, humiliated, insulted, cheated, and discriminated against. When he married the white 15-year-old Ethel Page in Gulgong, they both suffered prejudice and eventually moved to Breelong to work for farmer John Morby. The records show how they were further humiliated and cheated out of hard-earned money. On Friday the 20th of July 1900, something snapped in Jimmy's mind, resulting in him leading his brother Joe, Jackie Underwood and his wife Ethel in a massacre of the Morby women and children at Breelong. The ensuing 4-month hunt, eventual capture and hangings struck fear into the entire country. The Mudgee Guardian published a list made by Jimmy of people with whom he sought revenge. Like the 2 schoolboy murderers at Columbine High and the lone Korean gunman at Virginia Tech in the USA, Jimmy considered himself bullied every day of his life. To understand Jimmy Governor's motives, we need to start in 1788, when the first fleet landed at Botany Bay. Inga Clendenin, in her fine historical book, Dancing with Strangers, points out that on the first night of their meeting, convicts, Indigenous people and soldiers danced together. Lieutenant William Bradley, second in command of HMS Sirius, wrote about his first encounter with Indigenous Australians.
These people mixed with ours and all hands danced together. The next day at Spring Cove, here was another impromptu dance party, when about a dozen of the local men came paddling in soon after the British landed, left their spears in their canoes as a sign of friendship, and all proceeded to more dancing and otherwise amusing themselves.
That was probably the last time the Eora people of the Sydney area had anything to dance about.
The stick figures on stick vessels became moving human forms under soiled canvas flags, then became uniform figures carrying sticks that launched projectiles of progress at frightened people who, on the day after dancing with strangers, sipping their ominous jars of slow poison, and, on that fatal night, were dispossessed. The strangers gathered the hunters into compounds and hunted gatherers over the steep cliff of integration or excluded oblivion.
Within 1 year of the arrival, a majority of Indigenous people around Sydney were dead from the European diseases introduced into the continent.
As early as May 1788, a convict working beyond the narrow bounds of Sydney Cove killed an Aboriginal person. They replied by killing 2 convicts, William Oakey and Samuel Davis, who were cutting rushes at the cove now known as Rushcutters Bay. Philip, determined not to aggravate the situation, decided that no reprisal should occur and actually demanded a more cautious attitude from all people working beyond the settlement. Aboriginal people adopted a different approach. They took every opportunity to harass the invaders, although they knew their weapons were inferior. They adopted a guerrilla approach. In July, a party of convicts was chased across the sand dunes between Sydney Cove and Botany Bay by a large number of Aboriginal people. Later that month, a convict was speared in the head and another was caught and ordered to strip. By winter, it was clear that a food shortage problem had existed for those groups who lived around the Tank Stream and fished in Sydney Cove. The large white population was depleting the fish in the harbour by netting huge catches. They were reducing the kangaroo population and they were polluting the water. Near starvation forced desperate measures. On the 9th of July, a party of Aboriginal people attacked the crew of the Sirius and escaped with a recently caught haul of fresh fish.
Convicts who got lost in the bush began reporting that some small groups of Aboriginal people seemed to be dying of hunger. The near paradise had been so delicately balanced. In 6 months, the British had destroyed a lifestyle which had outlasted British history by tens of thousands of years, and the British dared to claim that they were civilised. If starvation killed large numbers of the Aboriginal community in the winter of 1788, then disease struck a more deadly and far-reaching blow in the early months of 1789. Aboriginal people, isolated for thousands of years from the diseases which had raged through Europe and Asia, had no resistance. They had no immune system, no defence. And the diseases carried by the sailors and convicts, smallpox, syphilis and influenza, were deadly. In less than a year, over half of the Aboriginal population living in the Sydney Basin had died from smallpox.
One-eyed Nallal speaks.
Listen, Belinda, because you come here, bring cattle, build up stockyard, homestead, this is not your country. Every waterhole, plain, river, rock, billabong is our dreaming. Belong to my people, right back to dreamtime.
Captain Cook. Tungi, that was her native name. She was a terrible tall woman who lived at Ulladulla. She had 6 husbands and buried the lot. She was over 100, easy, when she died. She was telling my father they were sitting on the point that was all wild scrub. The big ship came and anchored out at Snapper Island. He put down a boat and rowed up the river into Bateman's Bay. He landed on the shore of the river, the other side from where the church is now. When he landed, he gave the Curries clothes and those big sea biscuits. Terrible hard biscuits they was. When they were pulling away to go back to the ships, these wild Curries were running out of the scrub. They'd stripped right off again. They were throwing the clothes and biscuits back at Captain Cook as his men were pulling away in the boat.
Land was cleared, food animals killed and dignity taken away. By 1792, 4 years later, Pamawoy, the Rainbow Warrior, began a 10-year resistance to what he saw as a white invasion. During that 10-year campaign, Pamawoy was captured and escaped, wounded twice and survived and built up a legendary reputation that ended with his shooting death in 1802. Once dead, his head was severed, put in a jar and sent to England, as were hundreds even thousands of Aboriginal body parts.
Family broken, the young men gone, the fighting futile, the battle done. He knelt to drink at the creek bed, and the flies drank deep also from a well in a rib cage, musket made that left Cornish lead in a shoulder blade, and a useless spear arm, and the baying dogs much closer. He leaned on his waddy and rose, looked at the blue of the mountain so far away and so close, with only the river between. And he began to run for the water, and stopped. Whole body shuddered, the flies rose in a cloud but quickly settled. His heartbeat was loud. He sniffed the wind as well as the dogs which were in Scotland bred to hunt the stag, but now rebel black or bolting lag were fair game and much more easy. He continued his run for the water. A wallaby froze, turned only its head, stared at the staggering human, sniffed blood with dread, in a flurry of leaves was gone. We caught him a chain from the water. The fastest dog died, the rest pulled him down. Throatless he ended in Sydney town. We pickled his head, received governor's thanks, and presented both to Sir Joseph Banks. Rise, rise, Gavin, Gavin, Kira.